LSU Press was kind enough to publish my debut story collection this year in September. The book is called Mannequin and Wife, and it's a collection of short fiction. It has I think, a really lovely cover. And the team at LSU Press, just a note about the team there, they were really great to work with. And I want to thank them all. But I especially would like to thank Neil Novak, James Long, and most especially James Wilson for dealing with me, which isn't always easy, I guess. So I am really thrilled to join the ranks of the wonderful fictioneers who have published works of fiction with LSU Press in the past. Writers like George Singleton and Matthew Baker, Lee Upton and Darren Doyle, Margaret Luongo and Chris Batchelder, all of whom have published fiction with LSU Press in the past. I'm thrilled to join, that my book is joining the company of those wonderful books. So just a tiny bit about me. I was born in Chicago, but I grew up almost exclusively in Little Rock, Arkansas, and subsequently lived all over this land. I hold a BA from Columbia University in New York City, an MFA from Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, and a PhD from the University of Cincinnati. My fiction has appeared in a good number of places, like One Story, Crazy Horse, Lit Hub, the Iowa Review, and has also won prizes. My short fictions won prizes from venues like Salamander, The Pinch, and Washington Square Review. And in addition, my book, Tales the Devil Told Me, another collection of short fiction, won the 2020 Press 53 Award for short fiction. And that book is coming out in October of next year. So October of 2021, I have another book coming out. So if you like what you hear here today, you might like that too. Just a little bit about the book itself and my work. Mannequin and Wife is made up of stories I wrote over an 11-year period. It's a combination of full-length stories and flash fiction. It's about half and half. Some of these I wrote while working on my master's, some I wrote while working on my PhD, some in the in-between times. My work tends to be speculative, and I like to explore the places where the marvelous and the mundane collide. My writerly obsessions include the impossibility of knowing other people, the danger and beauty of the human animal, and the fact that our world is constructed entirely out of narratives. Each of the stories in Mannequin and Wife complicates and explores at least one fundamental pairing. So siblings, co-workers, parents and children, husbands and wives, things like that. And the story I will read today is no exception. I'm going to read a story called Rebirth of the Big Top. This story originally appeared in the Iowa Review in 2014. It takes me about 25 minutes to read this story. And when I am done reading, I will answer any questions that may have come in or that may be in the chat. So here we go. I'm going to take it away with Rebirth of the Big Top. Miranda, the elephant girl, was the first of them. Trevor hired her to work concessions on Fridays and alternate Wednesdays. I cannot cook and I don't do windows, she joked in halting English. Anything else, I'm your girl. Trevor guessed she was pushing 40. She wore cut-off dungarees and a half shirt, making no attempt to hide her condition. From a distance, the skin of her arms, legs, and torso looked filthy or like the spotted pelt of a jaguar. Close up, rough gray scales leapt into focus. Trevor perched on the edge of his battered desk, watching her stare down the box fan that circulated stifling air through his office. Words like armored and stegosaurus and parched scuttling through his brain. The skin of her back resembled a relief map of a locale he'd never imagined. Gil Nathan's world-famous carnival and sideshow had been touring the Southeast when an aneurysm erupted in Gil Nathan's brain, killing him, stranding his employees outside Atlanta. Trapeze artists and lion tamers, strong men and acrobats, bareback riders and clowns, a whole slew of human oddities. I cannot tell you how much appreciation I feel, Miranda said, as Trevor showed her how to load and operate the popcorn popper, how to change the soda syrup, and deal with the sticky drawer on the cash register. Most of us have never known any other life. It would be nice if you could hire more of my colleagues. But no one came to the drive-in. Trevor couldn't even afford the elephant girl. He wasn't sure why he'd hired her in the first place. Cassie hadn't had the strength to see it through. Trevor had read as much in a note she'd affixed to the white door of the Frigidaire on a Monday morning in April. Joshua had just turned 12. When Trevor touched the sleeping boy's shoulder, Josh's sunken blue eyes snapped open. She's gone? Trevor nodded. Josh struggled to a seated position. Where do you think she'll go? California? It's where all the beautiful people end up. That morning, Trevor quit his job in order to take over the boys' schooling. Are you crazy? Nick Peterson said. You're the best we've got. You were born to do this. Trevor had always had a knack for turning failing businesses around. When he was 8, the addition of fresh lime to his lemonade made his the busiest stand in a 12-block radius. At 10, he'd suggested that his uncle knock a hole in the south wall of his casual dining restaurant to install a drive-through, and sales at Carl's Cozy Corner had tripled. And as for his father, a furrier who hawked the pelts of rabbits, minks, and foxes in the viscous atmosphere of North Georgia, Trevor's myriad suggestions, layaway, soft lighting, comfy chairs, cool drinks, added up to pure profit. As a consultant with the Atlanta firm of Dowd, and Blessing, Trevor had traveled the country for 10 years, studying business plans and cost analyses, telling people from all walks of life how to run their enterprises better. On average, he increased profitability by an astounding 57%, twice the percentage achieved by any other DD&B consultant. We could go under without you, Nick Peterson pleaded. Sorry, Trevor said. My priority is the boy. Cassie had been gone a month when Josh announced that he might like to see California. Trevor had just finished stirring Vermont maple syrup into Josh's oatmeal. When he lifted a napkin to wipe a glop from the boy's chin, an unexpected sob tore from Trevor like pressurized molten matter escaping a volcano. Shh, Josh said, placing a withered hand on his father's arm. We're okay. In terms of hair, Josh had only ever had a thin fringe hugging the outside of his enormous cranium. His body was the brittlest thing Trevor had ever touched. The wrinkling of his skin had started a couple of years earlier. Sometime in the next year, he would most likely suffer a fatal heart attack. That afternoon, they studied geography. Trevor spread a map of the United States across the kitchen table, and he and Josh pushed matchbox cars from state to state, memorizing capitals. Each state was a particular shade of blue. These tonal variations roiled over the map like ocean waves. Josh had spent his entire life in Georgia. Trevor decided what he and the boy should probably do was travel. After the Elephant Girl, Trevor hired Neil, who'd accompanied Miranda to a Wednesday shift at the concession stand. The hirsute young man closely resembled post-transformation Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman. You do not mind if he just stands beside the counter, Mr. Trevor? Miranda had said. Neil has nowhere to go, and he is crazy for American movies. Trevor, too, was crazy for American movies. He figured this was why, after returning from his cross-country travels, he hadn't gone back to Dowd, and Blessing. Why, instead, he'd taken the remainder of his savings and purchased the Big Top Drive-In, an establishment on the brink of foreclosure and collapse 20 miles south of Atlanta. When he was a boy, his parents had often taken him to the big top. The cinematic outings had given his family a much needed break, releasing the tension that forever charged the air at home. Nights at the big top were organized by genre: Western Wednesdays, noir Thursdays, romance Saturdays. Trevor knew he'd seen Arsenic and Old Lace on a Tuesday, now Voyager on a Saturday, Destry Rides Again on a Wednesday. The taste of popcorn and fountain soda, the tinny sounds that burst from the metal speaker hung on the window of his father's Buick, the sticky sensation of bare thighs against leather, the sight of his mother resting her curly head on his father's shoulder. These were the bright spots of boyhood. When Trevor took over the big top, he screened the films of his youth. He reintroduced genre nights. The public stayed away in droves. Perhaps you should try showing something modern, Mr. Trevor, Miranda suggested after a couple of weeks. Shirley MacLaine and Steve McQueen, Bye Bye Birdie, Warren Beatty, Then the People, They Might Come. Trevor set Neil up in the booth, teaching him how to run the projector, how to spot the white circle that heralds the real change, how to load the heavy spools of film. Where are you from, Neil? He asked. Upstate New York, the young man replied. Cold up that way. It's good for my condition, better than this heat. What about Miranda? Oh, this is the place for her. Swampy. Cold dries her out something terrible. You two together? Neil shrugged. Sort of. Ever think about shaving? Sure, Neil replied. I used to, but it just keeps coming back. Trevor had gotten his first tattoo in North Carolina, on the lower right side of his back. Cool, Joshua had said, running his fingers over the saran-covered Tar Heel state, shaded the same blue as its counterpart on their U.S. map. I want one. You're too young. Josh looked 30 years older than his father. The absurdity of Trevor's statement wavered between them. Come on, Dad. What are you afraid of? He feared the pain that streaked his son's face as Tiny, the tattoo artist, injected subcutaneous ink. The burly man had hesitated for several long seconds before agreeing. You sure he's old enough? Trevor looked at Josh, who peeled off his striped shirt to reveal skeletal arms, a shriveled chest and back. The boy nodded enthusiastically. Trevor turned to Tiny and did the same. Mingled with the discomfort on Josh's face was evidence of the boy's particular and serene strength, fortitude bred from a lifelong battle with agony. As they ambled back to the Mountaineer Motor Court, something swelled inside Trevor. He swung his son high in the air, then hugged him to his chest. In cabin 12, they stood with their backs to the mirror, shirtless, peering over their shoulders, studying their matching modifications. Cool, Josh said again, softly. The plan was to hit every state, driving the Chevy up the East Coast to Maine, making their way down to Alabama, then back up to Michigan, and so on. They'd set out in May. The weather was fine in Pennsylvania and New York, in Vermont and New Hampshire. They didn't spend long in each state, just time enough to see a couple of sites and add a tattoo to their burgeoning body maps. Trevor estimated it would take 3 months to reach California. It's nothing like home, he told Josh. The trees are different, and the flowers and the animals. It's almost like another country. What do you think she's doing? Trevor couldn't imagine. When they met, Cassie had been an esthetician with aspirations. She loved musicals, The King and I, and Kiss Me Kate, and Guys and Dolls. She belted out numbers in the shower, while washing dishes, and behind the wheel of the car. Occasionally, she would cradle Trevor's head in her lap, ruffling his thinning hair with her nervous fingers, singing softly, her eyelids low. She was too pretty for Trevor, who'd never been more than average looking. If she hadn't gotten pregnant with Joshua, Trevor doubted she would have married him. He'd been working for Dowd and Blessing just over a year, building his unassailable reputation when the boy was born. No, Cassie had said after Dr. Derringer sat them down. I don't believe you. Their son was 2. By the age of 7, he would appear to be 50. It would be a miracle if he saw 13. That's not possible, Cassie said, turning to Trevor. Tell him Josh isn't sick. Tell him we can't watch him die, that we won't. Dr. Derringer's office was flooded with afternoon light, but Trevor felt a fog creeping through. He thought of Max Schreck, of the eerie jagged shade he'd cast on the walls in Nosferatu. The shadow of the vampire had heralded death. If it fell upon you, you were done for. Trevor, Cassie said, but Trevor was afraid to lift his eyes. He didn't want to look at his wife. He reached for her hand, which lay in his palm like something cold, scaly, inanimate. Please, she'd said. Maybe she's working as an extra on a musical, Trevor said to Josh as they zoomed from Kentucky into Tennessee. Maybe she'll get picked out of the crowd when the star breaks an ankle and she'll take over the lead. Are you mad at her? I don't know. Are you? Josh was eating animal crackers from one of those red circus train car boxes. He held up 2 elephants. Sitting on his knees, he walked them slowly across the dashboard of the Chevy, scooting closer and closer to Trevor. Just as the animals crested the rise over the instrument panel, Josh snatched them back and crammed them into his mouth. He pressed his heavy head into his father's upper arm. Yeah, he said when he finished chewing, but I think I forgive her. After Miranda and Neil came Julius the lobster man, whose hands were shaped like 2 crustaceous claws. Conjoined twins, Sheila and Shirley shared an enlarged heart. Dwayne had no arms and Ruby no legs. Gina, the giantess, stood nearly 7 feet tall. Bertram's parasitic twin dangled from his lower spine. Trevor gave each employee a shift a week in the concession stand or the ticket booth. Sometimes he paid them to pick up trash that non-existent customers left. Even when they weren't working, his employees gravitated to the big top, where they hung around, chatting with one another, watching the movies Neil projected onto the screen. Dr. Ehrlich's magic bullet, the man who came to dinner, force of evil. One night, Trevor was awakened by a light scratching on his bedroom window. He rose and stumbled to the front door. His dilapidated cottage stood on the backside of the drive-in and had been included in the asking price. On the tiny porch, he discovered Miranda wearing her customary cutoffs and half shirt. Why won't you show the modern films? She asked. The scent of whiskey wafted from her curling lips. Why do you insist on showing movies no one wants to see? Does Neil know you're here? She shrugged. Neil does not own me. Trevor seized her scabrous arms near the shoulders. She smelled like the desert. Making love to the elephant girl was like going to bed with a belt sander, marvelously painful. Trevor wished that her warm, moist interior were as desiccated as her exterior, that her mouth and vagina would abrade him like the skin of her chest and legs. Cassie had been as pliable as room temperature butter, and she'd smelled of new-mown hay. After Josh's diagnosis, she'd started slinking around Trevor, dim and silent as a shade. When the time came, she announced that she would school Josh at home. Trevor was both relieved and ashamed of his relief. I know kids can be cruel, he said, but the boy doesn't have long. Should we really isolate him further? Cassie bared her teeth. She slapped her husband's face. She moved her things into Josh's room, sleeping in the extra twin bed. From then on, Trevor caught only glimpses of his wife, impressions of her. She spent nearly every moment with their son, but Trevor knew nothing of what she taught him. I know how to make a business turn a profit, he said to Miranda as they lay sidewise across his iron bed. That's not what I'm after. What are you after? I don't exactly know. She placed a coarse palm against each of his cheeks. You think you know pain, she said. I see this. Something claws at your insides. But listen to me, Mr. Trevor. Pain is skin so dry it cracks when you smile, and you don't know shit about it. The following evening, a small crowd of teenagers showed up at the big top around 10 p.m. Key Largo had started at 9. They parked their cars in front of the screen, but didn't remain in them. They got out and swarmed the concession stand, bought popcorn and sugar babies, nachos and sodas from Miranda and Gina the giantess. Rather than returning to their cars, the kids settled on the pavement. They sat munching and slurping, pushing hair out of their faces, watching Miranda and Gina talk with Sheila and Shirley and Julius, who carried legless Ruby in his arms. Just for fun, Bertram started juggling, and Dwayne ate popcorn with his feet. The teenagers applauded. They tossed coins, which clanked loudly against the concrete. Trevor and Josh saw the Grand Canyon and Mount Rushmore, the world's largest ball of twine and Little Bighorn battlefield. They explored deserted mining camps and ghost towns of the Wild West. The geographic pictograms on their backs grew, filling out, moving toward completion. They ate at greasy spoons and barbecue restaurants, hot dog stands, and hamburger joints. They stayed in motor lodges, motor courts, motor inns. Even when he grew exhausted, which happened more and more often, Josh emitted a steady stream of commentary, speaking in a breathy rush, not only to Trevor, but to anyone in earshot, vacationing families, truckers, melancholy drifters. Trevor had never seen the boy so animated. His conversations weren't the stilted exchanges one might expect between strangers and a kid who spent his life in solitary. Josh was achingly genuine. He tore at Trevor's heart. Occasionally, someone would ask, "Is that a kid or an old man?" "He's my son," Trevor would reply. "What's wrong with him?" "Nothing," Trevor would say, or "I don't know what you mean. He has a degenerative condition," or "It's just that he's going to die soon." As they cruised the Vegas Strip, sliding past the Tropicana and the Stardust and Circus, Trevor sneaked glances at the colored lights playing over his son's crumpled face. Josh kept coughing, but he was grinning like a madman. In Oregon, Trevor took him to a shaky, bandy-legged MD who said the time had come to make the boy comfortable. Trevor had to practically force the pain pills down his son's throat. As they crossed the border into California, Trevor and Josh cheered, high-fived. "How will we find her?" Josh asked at a diner outside Cupertino. "I don't know," Trevor said, eating French fries the boy had drowned in ketchup. "I don't know if she's here." Josh's wrinkled brow furrowed further. "Why did we come?" "I thought you should see it," Trevor said, his hands rising from the Formica tabletop to carve a sphere in the air. In Los Angeles, they visited Universal Studios and the back lots at MGM. They toured the La Brea tar pits. They took off their shoes, cuffed their trousers, and strolled along the beach. They scurried into the surf, dashing back as the tide chased them in. Trevor watched the sun's light diffusing softly, flowing around dunes and seagrass and sidestepping crabs, illuminating Josh with an impossible halo, one that made him look like a holy relic, a shriveled Buddha. Trevor couldn't stop crying. He wanted to take his son's hand and walk into the ocean, to keep walking, just the two of them, to tromp all over the sea floor, to find sunken ships stuffed with pirate booty, to commune with dolphins, tiger sharks, killer whales. "Don't worry, Dad," Josh said. "I never believed it." "What?" "That I'd be okay." "What else did she tell you?" "That no one can hold a candle to Gene Kelly." "What else?" She said, you know how to bring things back to life. You believe that? Josh didn't respond. He slipped his cold hand into Trevor's. They'd almost reached the Georgia border when Trevor tried to rouse his son and found that he was unable. He pulled off the road and parked on the shoulder. He studied Joshua, who lay across the front seat as though lost in slumber, his heavy head resting on Trevor's thigh. Trevor slid out from under the boy, stepped from the car. He staggered along the gravel edge of the highway, blinded. Pontiacs and Fords and Buicks whizzed past. Horns honked. The quality of the light knocked him off balance. The sun burned unbearably, like a 1,000-watt bulb without a shade. Trevor shielded his eyes with both hands. He stumbled, falling to his knees. Motorists rolled down their windows and shouted. An older couple pulled over. The man caught Trevor under the arms and eased him toward their convertible sedan. He opened the back door, sat Trevor down on cream-colored leather, handed him a clean, pressed handkerchief. Trevor mopped his brow and cheeks. The couple looked at him with concern. He told them about Josh, everything, from the beginning. He started with the day his son was born, with the way the light in the maternity ward had coiled itself around the boy, illuminating his particular serenity. Even as an infant, Josh had rarely wept. There had been no fixing him, no way to understand his pain. Trevor envied Cassie her ability to deny. He wondered if, wherever she was, she sensed the shift in the natural order of things. If she noticed the way Joshua's passing had altered the sun. I wish you could have met him, he said to the couple. I'm not sure how I'll go on. He wrote to Cassie's parents. They flew in from Michigan, but there was no sign of Cassie. On the day of Josh's funeral, the U.S. map etched across the boy's back was nearly complete. Trevor drove down to Florida and had the Sunshine State's blue shape added to his own map. On the way home, 20 miles south of Atlanta, he passed the decrepit remains of the Big Top Drive-In. He pulled over. He studied the sagging screen and the listing concession stand, landmarks that, like his son, had aged before their time. He thought of the bright spots of boyhood, Gary Cooper in The Pride of the Yankees, Margaret O'Brien in Little Women, characters who faced death with a stoicism that had once struck him as pure fantasy. Trevor wanted to cry, but he was out of tears. Less than a month after the first gawking crowd of teenagers showed up, the drive-in was crawling with customers. Not just high school kids, but their parents and grandparents, their younger brothers and sisters, whole families, out-of-town guests. People came from Atlanta, and then they started coming from Savannah, from Charleston. Neil projected movies onto the screen, but this wasn't what drew the crowds. Most nights, every spot was taken. Overflow customers parked in a nearby field and walked over. They milled between cars and around the periphery. Many brought blankets and picnic baskets. On a stage Trevor and Neil had erected in front of the screen, those employees who weren't busy serving popcorn, pouring sodas, or tearing tickets did what they did best, put their perverted bodies on display, showcased that which set them apart. Miranda roared and stomped her scaly feet. Ruby walked on her hands. Shirley and Sheila sang duets, songs straight from the heart. Bertram performed feats of magic, making his parasitic twin disappear and reappear. Customers thronged the stage and the concession stand. It was all the employees could do to keep up. Money started pouring in. Trevor kept only enough to maintain the facilities and equipment. The rest he divided evenly among his employees. Mr. Trevor, Miranda said as she mounted him in his rickety bed as they bobbed together like buoys on the swelling surface of the sea, she sliding her abrasive skin across his. How can we ever repay you? On a bright fall day, they stood together outside a silver trailer that housed an Atlanta tattoo parlor. You do realize the pain will be only temporary, Miranda said. Which is worse, Trevor said, pain or humiliation? The elephant girl laughed. She shook her head. I cannot say. These have been bound together since I was a child. What I find most unbearable is indifference. 4 6-hour sessions were required to coat Trevor's skin in tattoos that simulated Miranda's gray scales. He'd never planned to convert his business into a carnival sideshow, but the progression had been inevitable. This is what Trevor told the reporter from the Atlanta Star who came out to do a feature. After a photographer snapped photos of Trevor and his employees artfully arranged on the stage, Trevor and the reporter retired to Trevor's office. The man's tie fluttered in the box fan's sticky breeze. This place was dead, he said, like Lazarus. Trevor shook his head. Not dead, he said, just sleeping. Miranda and Trevor billed themselves as the elephant couple. Trevor relished taking the stage with her night after night, drinking from the sea of emotions that flowed from the audience to lap at his tattooed feet. Delight and horror, pity and shame. When he turned to the screen, exposing his backside, and stood gazing up at 20 feet of Marlena Dietrich or Tyrone Power, a whispering rush sounded, a collective intake of breath, followed by a weighty silence. As the crowd gaped at his geographic hieroglyphs at the 48 continental United States, spattered in varying shades of blue across prickling human flesh, he swiveled his head toward Miranda, who smiled, lowering her scaly lids. The elephant girl's belly swelled, its skin taut and crackling with life, and Trevor's fingers trembled, aching to stroke its splintered surface. That is the end of the story. So, I don't know. Okay, so okay, so there are a couple of questions. I see a couple of questions here in the chat. So here is one. I'll, if anyone has questions, thank you for listening to me read that sort of long story. If anyone has questions, please, I guess, just ask them. I am not a big technology person, so you'll have to bear with me if I completely mess this up. So I have a question here. Hi, Jen. I loved Sunny from Sunny. I love Mannequin and Wife, and I'm now a big fan of yours. Thank you. I'd love to know more about your writing process. Where do you write? Do you write on a schedule? How do you cope with writer's block if you ever get it? Oh goodness, yes. So this is a great question. Learning how to write is I'd say it's a lifelong endeavor. I will continue learning for the rest of my life. I used to write at a desk for many years, but I have shifted now. I have to write in a chair, sitting in a sort of a comfortable chair with my feet up and my laptop on my lap. Because if I sit at a desk for hours and hours and hours, as I do, my feet swell. So I learned that when I was putting together my MFA thesis book. And I do like to write in the same place. I've just moved into a new house. I have an office for the first time in my life. And I'm really old. And I have a chair in my office that I am just now getting into the swing of sitting in, to work, which is lovely. I am someone though, who once I have been writing in one confined space for a long time, I like to shift. I like to go out and maybe write for 2 or 3 hours in a coffee shop and shift my location. That can sometimes help me if I'm stuck in a story or, stuck at a certain place in a narrative. To shift my position can help me. Now I used to write, like 12 hours a day, as much as I possibly, whenever I wasn't working, I would write for many years. And then that's just foolishness. Like I burned myself out, So my ideal writing schedule is I'd love to write for about 5 hours a day. Flannery, I always say this, Flannery O'Connor famously wrote for 3 hours in the morning, and that was her whole writing day. I'm a morning person, and that's when I'm strongest and my mind is sharpest. So I like to start immediately as soon as I get up. And I like to work for 3 or so hours, maybe take a break, and then come back and do another 2 or 3 hours. And that's all work and life permitting. So, and of course, writer's block. I'm the kind of writer, I have too many ideas. So I would never. I guess it's not that I haven't. Writer's block, as in sitting there staring at the blank page, I have no idea what to do. That's not, I've never been like, I am devoid of ideas. That's never happened to me, because I'm the kind of writer who has like a flood, an ongoing, never ending flood of ideas. I'll never get to them all. That's my great fear, is that I will never get to all the things I want to write. But I definitely sit for hours hammering away, one sentence. Sometimes I'll spend an 8-hour writing day writing a paragraph or less, because, writing is like, for me, it is as they say, you have to put yourself in the chair and make yourself sit there for large stretches of that time. Nothing happens. And I'm like, come on, what are you doing? And then something will come to me 20 minutes before I have to be somewhere, and I'll, hurriedly, so I think that writing is difficult to schedule, difficult to force, but I also am not the kind of writer. I also do not think it's wise to just wait for the muse to descend. I think you do have to put yourself in the chair, in the place where you write every day for hours. And even if you can't really move forward, you need to do whatever you can, to be moving forward, i.e. revising, doing, looking over sentences you've already read. If I go back to a certain point and read, I can often re-pick up the thread. I used to, when I was a very early stage writer, had to always return to the beginning of the piece, no matter how long it was. So trying to write a novel, and trying to read the entire thing every day, every time you sit down to it. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for the question. Sunny, that's very kind. So let's see. How do you decide how long a story is? Do you find yourself writing shorter stories and extending them during the editing process, or writing longer stories and cutting them? This is a good question. I think that by this point, I've been writing for so long that when I get an idea, I can usually tell how I can pretty much. I can sort of get it down to almost the exact page length. I can be, this feels like a 15 pager. This feels like a 2-pager, I mean, my two basic modes are full length story and flash. I write flash. A lot of full length fiction writers like me do not write flash. I love flash because it enables me to get to the satisfaction feeling, very quickly, as compared to a really long project that takes, months, weeks, months, years. But I know usually after writing for a number of years, I was able to tell how long something will be. But in the early days of my writing, I had to cut. I'm an overwriter, and my natural inclination is overwriting. So I would write, and I also tend to overcomplicate. I also have I'm one of these. I'm like, let's throw everything but the kitchen sink into the story, and then I go back and I'm like, you need to pull some of this back. So in my earlier days as a writer, I would always overwrite, and then I would pull them back. So I tend to be someone who, I have too much of everything, too many ideas, too many words. I want to describe this too many ways. It's kind of the way that I work. For me, that is how it tends to go. I used to write very long pieces that I would have to then whittle down, but then at a point I shifted to knowing kind of immediately what length story and idea would support. So yes, thank you. So, and then here's another one from Laura. I love the image of making love with the Element Girls, like going to bed with a belt sander. How do you decide what things to compare? How do you settle on images like that? That is a favorite of several people that I've heard from. That particular simile really strikes a chord. I think that we try about a million. I try about a million things before I come up with the right comparison. that image, uh, that was, it's a difficult, that is a particularly difficult image to convey as something lovely and desirable, right? Someone who has skin that's like sandpaper, and someone who's saying that they want that against their skin. And I mean, the idea behind it is that he's suffering and he wants the physical pain to take away some of his psychic pain, and that's a common thing that happens in our lives. But to make that palatable and seem at all seem at all desirable was a challenge. But I do, and I guess I probably tried, several different, items that and then, going to bed with a belt sander just came to me. And, writing is half working incredibly hard and slaving away and dedicating yourself to something that seems impossible, and then half just fortuitous magical inspiration that just descends upon you. So it's like the most for someone like me who's I'm a really interesting, I'm like a very logical person and a very plotting person in a lot of ways. I move from start to finish. That's how I go. I'm sort of basic in a lot of ways and very logical, but then on the other hand, I also have an incredibly wild and vivid imagination. So I think that writing sort of, for someone like me, it's sort of the ideal thing, because it's a combination of very hard work and logic and structure, and forcing yourself to follow guidelines and things like that, and then within those guidelines, completely going bonkers and busting loose. So that, and that's my work. My work is like that. So how do you stay motivated to write for that long? I can't do it anymore. So when I didn't start writing till I was 30, and I was I was a maniac. I would write, and other people in my writing programs and other writers were like, you probably need to calm down, because you're gonna kill yourself with the schedule. People can't write for that long, and they were right. But I would literally sit for 8 to 10 hours if I had a full day off from whatever job I was working, like a weekend day or usually a weekday, because I worked in restaurants for many years. That was restaurants and bars and various jobs like that. So which would allow me the daytime free to sit and write for hours and then go to work a night shift in restaurants. So I can't sit for that long anymore. But I was young and dumb and not as old, not as stove up. Like now I can't sit for that long because I'll be crippled. So, but anyway, yeah, I would get up and move around. You can't really literally sit for that long. I would get up and go do something, that also helps to shake things loose in your brain when you're writing. So what was something interesting that didn't end up in the book? That's an interesting question. Gosh. I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can think of one. So an image character story that didn't end up in this book. I'm trying, hang on, let me think. I don't know. This book has so many images and characters and stories in it. It is like the kitchen sink. So I don't know if I left any of them out. Because there are 22 stories in this book. Half of them are flash, so 1 or 2 pages, and then the other half are full length. So I'm gonna answer that question by saying I stuffed every image, character, and story that I could come up with into this book. I stuffed them all in here. I didn't leave a single one out. So I'm gonna end on that note. So, okay. So I see that it says here that's all the questions. So I guess that is it for me. I want to thank you all for tuning in, for listening to me read. I love to read, so it was a joy for me to get to read my work, which we don't get to do that often. And I also really want to thank LB, Kodak, and everyone at LSU Press for their support, for this beautiful book that they helped me make, and for hosting this. So thank you, and I will see you all.